I have a theory as to how the Beholder came to be designed. The Beholder is one of the earliest creations that is unique to D&D. It went on to become an iconic monster and a major part of the Dungeons & Dragons brand. Most other iconic monsters in D&D are taken from folklore and from fiction such as Lord of the Rings, and so the characteristics of these monsters are informed by these stories, as well as our common understanding of how they work. So dragons fly and breathe fire, and Gorgons petrify those who meet their gaze. The thing is, that when the game rules were in their earliest phase, there would not have been a common set of mechanics to draw upon to determine how these abilities actually worked in game terms. Instead, the mechanic would be designed around how the monster was thought to exist in folklore and in literature. In the case of a dragon, the monster comes first, and the mechanics, probably inspired around how artillery work in wargaming, come second. It is the same with a Gorgon. Everyone knows that a Gorgon can turn its victims into stone. The challenge comes from taking this knowledge and turning it into a mechanic. Now, this is all just speculation on my part. I don't really know how the earliest versions of the rules came to be about, but I was thinking about it when I was trying to figure out how it was that the Beholder first came to be designed. You see, a Beholder is different than a dragon or a Gorgon in two ways. Firstly, it's not based on anything that previously existed within folklore or literature. And secondly, the Beholder combines a lot of different mechanics together into a single monster. Each of these two differences mean that Beholder could not have been designed in the way that I described for a dragon or a Gorgon. The fact that a Beholder was a unique creation means that it did not come with a predefined set of abilities and behaviours from which to develop its mechanics. And the fact that a Beholder had such a large number of different abilities suggests that all the things that it could do were taken from a list that was developed for previous monsters. The Beholder is the ultimate monster. It is the answer to the question, what happens if we combine every monster into a single form? I think that this is one reason why the Beholder has maintained its iconic status over the years, but it's just part of the answer. Another factor is the elegant way in which these mechanics have been brought together into its abstract physical form. The concept of an eye stalk that can produce one of an array of different powers is abstracted so that it doesn't lead to the monster becoming overly designed like some kind of 10-headed chimera. And this leads us to the main reason why I think the Beholder has maintained its iconic status throughout the years. It was the first monster to integrate so many different mechanics into a single coherent form, and every monster that's designed afterwards has to tread lightly so as not to step on its vast design space. Hello, and welcome to 3 Ages D&D, the show where I overthink many aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Ross, and today I want to talk about how to turn your boring band of goblins into awesome Beholders, using a new mechanic I call Tactics. There was another type of monster that I didn't mention in my introduction to this video, that of the generic monster. Monsters such as orcs and goblins, or elves and dwarves, are similar to dragons and gorgons in how well represented they are within the fantasy genre, but unlike dragons and gorgons, they are kept relatively real simple and lack strong defining mechanics. Although it is understood that orcs are strong and elves are nimble, it is also understood that there's a lot of variety within individuals of these groups, and so they provide a great chance for customization. Today I want to introduce a new method of customization inspired by Beholders, a mechanic I call Tactics. The idea behind this mechanic is to think about medium-sized groups of monsters, both in terms of the individuals, but also in terms of the group collectively. So during their turn, we take all the actions that we would normally take for those monsters. However, at the start of their turn, we roll a d8 to determine whether or not the group will use one of their tactics. If we roll equal to or under the number of monsters in the group on a d8, then we trigger one of their tactics. It looks like this. Once we have triggered a tactic, we roll a d6 on this list to see which ability this group will use. Goblin Tactics, N over 8. 1. Call reinforcements. One of the goblins pulls out a horn and blows into it to alert his fellows nearby. More enemies will appear in 1d4 rounds. 2. Get 'em. Up to 3 of the goblins break away from combat and immediately pounce on one of the adventurers, stabbing them with knives. The target makes a strength 10 plus 2 N save, or takes ND4 damage, where N is the number of goblins involved in the attack. 3. Throw insects. The goblins throw small bags at the PCs filled with insects. The bags break open, covering the PCs with tiny venomous bugs. The PCs take 1 damage each round from the biting insects, and must make a Constitution 10 save, or take an additional 1d4 poison damage. This continues each round for each character, until they have removed all the bugs from their bodies. 4. Paralysis dart. One of the goblins pulls out a dart coated in venom and throws it at a PC, making a +5 attack. If the attack hits, the target takes 1d4 damage and must make a con save or become paralysed for 1 minute, making a new save at the end of each of their turns. 5. Goblin Assassin. A previously unseen Goblin Assassin appears and makes an attack against one of the PCs. Treat this assassin as a normal goblin, except it can deal an additional 2d6 sneak attack damage. 6. Shield Wall. The goblins attempt to form a defensive line, increasing their AC by 2 until the start of their next round. This mechanic creates an extra dimension of difficulty to our fights without changing the base stats of the monsters. If you want to, you can use this as a special layer action of the goblins and change the abilities to reflect the environment that they're in. Or you can just use it for any medium-sized band of goblins that your players come across. Now let's talk about orcs. Orc Tactics. N/8. 1. Orc Grog. One of the wounded orcs pulls out a wineskin and takes a swig of grog. He heals for 1d10 health. If there are no wounded orcs, an orc can use this to take an action surge instead. 2. Berserk. One of the orcs enters a rage, gaining a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls. For as long as that orc remains standing, he will inspire one of his fellows to enter a rage at the start of the orc's turn. 3. Challenge. A tough-looking orc with a chip on his shoulder steps out of the group and challenges the fighter to one-on-one combat. If the fighter accepts the challenge, the orc gains double hit points and can make an attack on each of its turns during the fight. If the fighter declines, then each of the orcs gains a +1 morale bonus to attacks for the rest of the combat. 4. Orc Strong. An orc makes a grapple attempt against one of the party. The PC must make an athletics or acrobatics check, their choice, opposed to the orc's athletics check. If the PC fails, they become grappled by the orc. 5. Orcish Warcry. One of the orcs lets out a mighty shout in an ancient tongue. Although mistaken for a battle cry, this is actually an ancient spell known to orcs used for disrupting magic. All enemy magic users who are currently concentrating on spells must make a concentration 10 check, or lose concentration. Additionally, during their next turn, any magic user must make a concentration 10 check to cast any spell. Failure means they lose the spell. 6. Crushing Blow. The next time one of the orcs attacks this turn, they attempt to deal a crushing blow. If the attack hits, it deals double damage. These abilities are themed around the orcs' martial culture. Orcs use combat to prove themselves to their comrades through feats of strength and bravery. Some abilities on this list, such as Challenge, may be appropriate to trigger only once during a combat, so feel free to re-roll it or pick another ability if it comes up more than once. Another ability, Orcish Warcry, has been given an anti-magic mechanic that might not be appropriate for your game or the situation, so go ahead and re-roll or change that one if it comes up. Lastly, I want to highlight a particular ability, Orc Grog. I think this ability is interesting because your players will not necessarily expect a group of orcs to have access to healing, but we have managed to give them some by taking the second wind ability of the fighter and matching it with the flavour of the Urks from the Lord of the Rings. I think this shows the kind of flexibility we have when customizing these kinds of monsters. In this video, I presented to you a new mechanic that you can use in your games, but I want to talk about the real purpose behind the mechanic and why I'm showing it to you. The purpose of this mechanic, and in fact of all mechanics, is to understand them. We want to understand why they were designed in the way they were, and how they function in our games when we use them. The purpose of the rules of D&D is not to provide a rigid framework of how things must be done, but to allow us to build a game intuition that gives us the freedom to run our games however we want. I like this mechanic, because I like using the random aspect of dice to escalate drama and tension in combat. But I will more often than not just choose a special action from one of my monsters to use, and I hope at the very least that some of the abilities I mentioned will give you a few ideas. And if you're disappointed that I didn't just port over all of the Beholder's abilities for my group of goblins, go ahead and give one of the goblins a Wand of Disintegration. I'm sure it will make for a memorable combat. Well, that's all for today on 3 Ages D&D, and I'll see you guys next time.